What do you think the life of a bank employee is like? Counting lots of bills, writing checks, exchanging money, and so on. You certainly don't expect customers to come in and deposit all their change they had saved up for 45 years. A huge number of coins placed onto your counter. It happened to the staff of the American Ruston Origin Bank in Louisiana. Saving pennies. In October 2015, the day starts off at the Ruston Origin Bank in Louisiana, much like any other day. But that changes as soon as Anders walks in. He wants to make a deposit, but not just any deposit. One that has saved up all his money for over 45 years. Now that he finds himself in heavy weather financially, the moment has finally arrived. The collection must be deposited so that he can pay his bills. Curious how Anders transported all his money to the bank? Keep watching the video to see how he did it. No, your eyes do not deceive you. Anders has kept his change in 15 large water bottles all these years. Next time you hang out by the water cooler, try imagining that the entire tank is full of pennies. How many of them would fit in there, do you think? And how much money would that amount to? To really understand exactly how many pennies were in Anders' collection, we have to go back to the beginning of his special collection. It started with a single penny. One day, Anders had found a shiny coin like that somewhere on the floor. And where most of us shrug our shoulders and put the change into a wallet somewhere, he decided to do things differently. An obsession had begun. From then on, every penny he encountered ended up in his collection. It is common for many people to save a little money every month, but imagine you couldn't touch the money you saved for 45 years. Every penny you store in a piggy bank stays there forever, until one day something changes, and suddenly you have 45 years of savings at your disposal. As inspiring as Anders' story is, we don't know if we would last that long. Even if you only save your smallest change, it will eventually add up to a nice amount. Anders experienced this as well when he wanted to transfer his saved amount to the bank. He had saved so many coins that a whole team was called in to help transport it to the bank. Together with 5 friends and family members, he managed to load the 15 water tanks onto a trailer. At the bank, the water bottles had to be brought in with a hand truck. Fortunately, Anders was well aware that his hand trucks and water bottles would cause some puzzled looks, so he made a plan. Anders called the bank beforehand. He was quite concerned about his deposit, because what if they couldn't do anything with all his change? Had he rolled his water bottles and wheelbarrow into the bank for nothing? Try putting yourself in his shoes. You have 15 gigantic water bottles of about 19 liters each. Approximately how many kilos would each bottle weigh? Are you going to hoist it onto the counter in front of a poor bank employee, who then has to count the lot? A quick call to the bank beforehand is the least you can do. Although Anders informed the Ruston Origin Bank a week in advance that he would be bringing his collection by, his visit caused a lot of surprise, but admiration as well. The deputy director of the bank, for example, watched the spectacle in disbelief. As mentioned, that particular day in October 2015 started out like any other for the employees of the Ruston Origin Bank. But when Anders shows up with his bottles and wheelbarrow, even Vice President Ryan Kilpatrick has to admit he's never seen anything like it before. It's great, of course. I think he's saved a lot of money over the years, he told ABC News. Anyway, naturally, a bank must make sure not to provide services to unsavory figures. For example, you can't just deposit a huge amount of money at your bank. Most stores have an upper limit for payments made in cash too. This prevents shady people from laundering their money, for example. In addition, many shops prefer card payments over cash payments for safety reasons. And that is why the employees of the bank were eager to know exactly how Anders obtained this gigantic amount of money. This is what he told the bank employees. In 2015, Anders was 73 years old. A quick calculation brings us to the conclusion that Anders saved his first penny when he was only 28 years old. He didn't start his collection to get rich, he explained in an interview. Instead, he had a much nobler reason for starting his collection. Anders saw more than just change in the money he saved. The American man told News Star that the pennies reminded him to be grateful. I realized that finding lost or abandoned coins was a sign from God to remind me to always be grateful, he said in the interview. Moreover, Anders went quite far to collect all this money, but with this motivation in mind, he managed to last 45 years. Curious how Othe Anders involved others in his collection? Surely it has happened to you. After a while, you decide to give all your furniture a good clean. That means vacuum cleaner the ready, storing everything away, including the pillows on the couch. You often find things that you had lost for months. Lost jewelry, remote controls, and of course a loose change. This also happened to Anders. When he went to visit friends or family, he occasionally came across pennies as well. He told News Star about this. If I was at someone's house and I found a penny, I'd kept it. I always said if it was a quarter, I'd give it back to them. But pennies, those I kept myself. Anders said in the interview that he saw the lost money as a reminder from God to be grateful for what he had. But that's not all. He also explains that the pennies always showed up when he needed them most. There were days when I didn't pray, but then I usually came across some small or lost coin that would remind me, he explained. And with this religious motivation, Anders managed to keep collecting all these loose pennies for a very long time. They waited in large water bottles for 45 years, and if it had been up to Anders, he would have continued saving them for a while. However, on that particular day in 2015, his many years of collecting pennies came to an end. Othe Anders has always been known by his peers as an extremely beloved man. The news about his collection quickly spread among friends, family, and acquaintances, and they were more than happy to help the man with his collection. For example, Anders' collection included coins belonging to his wife and his children. Friends also regularly helped with his collection. But they weren't the only ones who helped expand Anders' collection. From an unexpected angle, several people decided to lend him a hand as well. He was a supervisor at a local high school. More specifically, he was head of detention, and you probably think that role would not make him very popular, but you couldn't be more wrong. Anders says that even at work, he regularly received pennies from his students. Imagine this. You're in detention, and you can kiss your afternoon off goodbye. But instead of getting mad, you remember that nice supervisor's special collection. You quickly look through your wallet to see if you have any loose change, and then give it to the person who is robbing you of your free afternoon without a second thought. Sounds unlikely, right? But then, you don't know Othe Anders yet. Even the students in detention helped Anders with his collection. He remembers that the children were often excited to bring pennies with them when they had to go to detention. But I never took money from people without giving them something in return, he said. Not even my wife or children. In short, Anders made himself very popular with this attitude. With this in mind, detention suddenly becomes a bit less unpleasant. Anders' collection also became part of a special competition. When you think of a competition, you might think of two runners going neck and neck, or two talented singers competing on stage. But Anders' pennies also became part of a special competition. An unusual competition soon developed between Anders and his good friend Jack Domino Kid Brown. Anders was not the only one who kept a collection of coins. Brown also stood his ground when it came to collecting. The battle between the two gentlemen was always friendly. For example, Anders said, "Jack collected pennies for me just as I did myself, and in turn, I set aside every coin I found for him." Because instead of individual pennies, Brown saved nickels. The two men helped each other to expand their collections considerably. But this friendship soon took on a competitive edge. We kept trying to outdo each other. That's how his nickels and my pennies started multiplying quite a bit, Anders explained. If you are curious about how you can develop such a good habit yourself, we have good news for you. It has been scientifically proven that learning new routines does not necessarily have to be that difficult. For Anders and for Brown, their collections changed from a playful thing into a beautiful habit and eventually became ingrained into their lifestyle. But how do you achieve something like that? Science has shown that generally, there is a 21 ninetieths rule for learning new routines. That is, it takes about 21 days to make a habit out of a novelty. But that's not all. It will then take you about 90 days before something is really a part of your routine, where you may first have to think about collecting loose pennies. This will soon become a regular part of your day, and after another 90 days, you don't even have to think about it anymore. So time for a new collection. Who knows, you might save just as much money as of the Anders. Where you might think that saving so much change will come naturally, Anders went one step further. He collected money that he found on the street or in other places. His wife, his children, his friends, and even the students of his school helped with his special collection. But Anders wanted to be able to save more pennies, so he went even further. Where is it that you can find the coins you need? Exactly at the cash register. Anders did his grocery shopping unlike anyone else. Whereas we might pay attention to exactly which products are discounted and what we need that week, Anders paid attention to something completely different. Even when he did his shopping, he thought about his coin collection. For instance, Anders said in his interview that he did a lot of math when he was at the grocery store. He always made sure to receive a few pennies in change. "I would never spend a penny just like that," he said. "I'd rather break bills into loose change than spend pennies or nickels," he said. And that good habit ultimately worked out well for him. Now that may all sound very reasonable. Putting in a little effort for a collection you care deeply about. That's not crazy, is it? But what if someone told you that with all that little money, you could amass an even bigger sum if you were willing to say goodbye to your pennies? Would you say yes? It may sound bizarre, but this was a choice that Anders had to make fairly early on in his collection. Want to know more about this difficult choice? Continue watching. Imagine this. You have 100 euros, and someone offers you 125 euros in return. We'd all accept that offer right away, right? Anders didn't. He was faced with exactly this dilemma in the mid-1970s. He had only been working on his collection for a few years when he received a special offer. American change was doing well. A very special campaign was started up. What happened? In 1974, there was a shortage of pennies, a bizarre idea, but this was the reason why. The material value of the copper coins was higher than the single cent it would be worth at the store. And that's why Anders wasn't the only one who wanted to keep the pennies to himself at the time. With a shortage of pennies, bonuses were offered in various places. Anders remembers, for example, that in his area a premium of no less than 25% was promised for the coveted coins. For every $100 you would hand in, you would receive $125. And yet, he turned down this deal. And when he finally did go to the bank to exchange all his pennies, it turned out to be quite a task. You may now be wondering why we put such a beautiful picture of a rhinoceros on this page. Wasn't this article about a man saving change? You may be thinking. And you are absolutely right. But we promise you that rhinoceros is relevant. This much we can reveal. That rhinoceros didn't help move Anders' collection. Those 15 bottles of coins were already enough of a surprise for the staff at the bank. No need to add a rhinoceros. But how is that rhinoceros relevant? It has everything to do with the size of Anders' collection. We've already shown you pictures of the gigantic water tanks full of coins on the back of a large car. And that had to be a pretty sturdy car, because those bottles weighed a lot. Together, Anders' water tanks weighed no less than 1,200 kilograms. To help you picture this, it is about as heavy as a rhinoceros. But why would Anders put an end to his collection after collecting 1,200 kilos of pennies? If it had been up to Othe Anders, he would have continued collecting for a while. He was by no means tired of his collection. Moreover, he was no longer concerned with the monetary value of the coins. No, after 45 years, it had become a sentimental project for him. He did not give up his collection completely voluntarily. Unfortunately, he had no other choice. We can't think of many things that would put an end to such a large collection. Just think, for 45 years, you have kept yourself busy with such a beautiful collection. Whether you collect football cards, stamps, or shoes, you probably won't get another chance in your life to keep a collection for 45 years. But even with the best will in the world, life sometimes takes a funny path. Anders experienced that too. This was the special reason why he gave up his collection. All good things must come to an end. But nobody could have expected that Anders' collection had to come to an end so abruptly. Himself least of all. It wasn't that Anders suddenly had a purpose for his coin collection. He was not planning on making any major purchases. And it wasn't because he suddenly had to pay for a medical procedure either. Not at all. It was something completely different. When you look around your own home, you probably see quite a few expensive things. Whether it is your smartphone, tablet, or laptop, your furniture, your TV, or perhaps a special collection. You want these items to be protected, right? That is why there is a good chance that you have taken out one or more insurance policies for the items in your household. So did Arthur Anders. But in 2015, he discovered that the value of his coin collection was too great to be covered by his insurance. And that is why his collection finally came to a close. But how much was that collection actually worth? And so, in October 2015, Anders went to his local bank with a collection of 15 water tanks. There he, just like the staff and the friends he brought along, faced a new challenge. How do you ensure that 1,200 kilos of coins end up in your account? That's quite a task. Step 1, of course, was to get the coins out of the tanks. And here, this wasn't done by half measures. The easiest way to open those bottles without damaging the coins turned out to be using an axe. Each water tank was hacked open with a few good whacks. Then Anders and his friends collected all the coins in several large buckets. The coins were then placed from the buckets into the counting machines with scoops. Fortunately, the counting process was automated. Imagine counting all this by hand. The final amount was. It still took quite a while before the counters were done with all of Anders' change. After all, machines like that can only process so many coins at a time. And of course, it's understandable that a bank is not completely set up for people bringing in 1,200 kilos of coins. Fortunately, using the machines and buckets, the system worked completely according to plan. But even with this modern tech, it took quite a while before all the coins were counted. In total, it took about 5 hours. So that's 5 hours of shoveling and pouring into a copper coin collection. In addition, the bank staff had to replace the storage space of the counting machines every 20 minutes. After all, no one expected that anyone would ever want to deposit so many coins. But it was a great result. Anders had collected exactly $5,136.14 in those 45 years. A beautiful amount, of course. And so it turns out, patience is rewarded. By maintaining his collection for 45 years, Anders finally managed to leave the bank with $5,000 extra in his account. Most people would definitely not say no to such a nice bonus, but Anders had mixed feelings about the moment the count was finished. My goal at the beginning was to fill 5 of those bottles, but I couldn't stop in the end, he said. Of course, after so many years, a collection also has a lot of symbolic and sentimental value. It's hard to imagine how many memories for Anders were hidden in all those coins. Friends and relatives who contributed, coins he found in special places, or maybe students from his school who have always stayed with him. Within hours, all these memories were suddenly credited to his bank account. If I hadn't redeemed them, I would have just continued with my collection, Anders said the day after handing the pennies in. What he did was certainly very impressive,